just being present and friendly on the phone, even though it's a adversarial relationship, quote unquote, it's really important because zero times that I got off the phone with somebody just yelling my ear off for 30 minutes did I find myself thinking, oh yeah, that was a really good argument. I liked that a lot. No.
Welcome to the Iron Mind Podcast. Join me, Josh Brumley, as we explore the minds of those who forged their paths through legal battles, business triumphs, and creative conquests. We uncover the stories behind their iron wills and innovative minds. Get ready for thought-provoking conversations, practical insights, and actionable advice. This is the Iron Mind Podcast. In today's episode, we have Jake Dawe. Jake is a 10-plus year injury auto claims veteran with experience in claims adjusting, litigation, management, and training and development. He's now a paralegal with Brumley Law Firm, seeing the other side of the personal injury world for the first time. Thanks for joining the show, Jake.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So if it wasn't clear to anyone who listened to the intro, you used to work at Geico.
Yep, Jake from Geico.
Jake from Geico. What was your role over at Geico before you came to Brumley Law Firm and started working for the good guys?
Yeah, so my last role, I was a training and development manager countrywide for all brand new adjusters into bodily injury, and then those adjusters who then got another promotion into handling litigation.
Great. So you have experience in, and I know this because I hired you, in the pre-litigation side and litigation from the defense point of view.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Pretty much everything from, one kind of data service, basic liability, basic coverage all the way through. Yeah.
Okay. And you've been at Brumley Law Firm now 2 months, somewhere around there.
Yeah, something about that.
Yeah.
Something
So
like that.
in this first 60-day period, what's the biggest thing that stands out about the difference between working for a major insurance carrier to now working for plaintiffs?
I think one of the things that I've noticed is just the environment and the atmosphere is so different. The atmosphere there was always kind of like, hey, gotta get on to the next thing, gotta get on to the next thing. And while we're working to resolve cases and things like that, I think being able to take the time to really truly understand the case, see what people are like, meeting them face to face, which we very rarely did. Every once in a while, we'd have a case that would go to a mediation or something like that. I'd see them in person, but really making that genuine connection with them, I think, has been the biggest key difference there.
As far as understanding, the point of view of a defense adjuster and then coming on to the plaintiff side now, what advice do you have for helping resolve plaintiffs' injury cases with any insurance company? Is there anything that you could say now that you've seen it in action and with your experience, things that stood out to you as being very persuasive?
Yeah. One of the things I was always wanting to know more about as an adjuster and was what tangible impact did this incident, this accident, whatever you want to call it, what did that have to that person? Oftentimes in a demand letter or letter of representation, things like that, it would be very cut and dry, or we'd see the same cut and paste demand over and over again.
Templates.
Yeah. And it just wasn't very compelling. It wasn't giving me, the adjuster, the information I needed to ask for the correct amount of authority. And I think a lot of the times there's a lot of strife and a lot of butting heads when really it's a difference of knowledge, and just, you might know this client very well. You might have might know them personally or have met with them several times face to face. We've never talked to them. And so we never seen that. And we don't know what they trade. We don't know. And
all
so
we know is what you wrote on this piece
Exactly.
of paper, and it's 2
Yeah.
pages, and it's the same 2 pages that you sent me on the last 10
Exactly.
cases. So how am I supposed to value this claim?
Right.
So what advice do you have for people who are breaking into personal injury to get better settlements or to help advocate for their clients with any insurance company?
like I said, I think it's really about knowing your case really well and being able to hop on the phone with them, be available, and talk it out. And not oftentimes it would end up being this combative butting heads where really the adjuster and the attorney were talking past each other and they weren't really focused on settling the case. They were just, I want this and I want this, and it's never going to happen. Where the adjuster might be coming from, well, my authority is only so much this, and your number is outside of that. So we're not having a productive conversation. Try again.
Yeah.
And so, like, it would just be this repeated conversation over and over again without really actually
Sinking into the
sink.
attorney's head.
Right, exactly.
So then in those situations, if an attorney who's listening to this is running into a roadblock with an
Mhm.
adjuster, the best way to get the adjuster to um, come to the table with the amount of money that we need is to give them more facts to increase their authority.
Yeah, and I think also too, it really depends on where the case is. If it's in litigation or if it's pre-litigation, there's oftentimes a delineation in what adjuster is handling that case. It's on a separate team. It's on a different there's a different mindset potentially of what's happening in the case. And if the lawsuit's filed, then X, Y, or Z might happen versus, an adjuster that hasn't handled litigation before and they don't know what happens at mandatory arbitration hearings, or they don't know how much experts truly cost the defense. And so they're not fully taking into consideration that, and then addition to that, not fully understanding some of the things we talked about earlier.
So do you think that there's a tangible difference in the value of a claim after it's been filed as a lawsuit?
I think so.
Yeah.
I do. And we never trained that. It wasn't ever something that
There was no line in the
there was no
sand that was
line in
like,
the
after it's
sand.
filed, add
Right.
15% to your last offer or anything like that.
Exactly. But oftentimes that's what ultimately happened. I do remember there being, adjusters that would be upset. I supervised some of them. They're like, oh, yeah, I saw what happened after we sent that claim up to litigation and they settled for in 2 days for more.
Yeah.
And it's like, why couldn't I do that? I was like, well, different circumstances. Maybe they had a better conversation. Maybe
Yeah.
they had more experience and they knew what to ask.
Mm.
And that I think is another thing too, is sometimes the adjusters know what they're missing because they're not asking the right questions.
If you're working with an adjuster who's maybe newer and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know what questions to ask, what should an attorney prompt them to ask or provide them so that you can increase that value? What are things that you saw missed on a regular basis?
I think a lot of the times venue was really important.
Hmm.
You would have an issue. You have a case as an adjuster. You could have a case that was in middle of nowhere, Washington. Maybe southeast around Pullman or something like that. Or you could have a case downtown King County, or you could have a case that's in Idaho or Oregon and or wherever, just depending on the structure of the insurance company. And it's really hard to understand, I think, at a glance, especially for an adjuster that's never seen litigation before, to truly understand what the differences in venues are and where the valuations can come from. And so if you're looking to persuade the adjuster that they may not be considering the value of the case the way that you'd like them to, also providing jury value,
Jury verdicts.
jury verdicts,
Yeah.
arbitration award verdicts, all that sort of stuff, to really make sure that they understand. And they're going to say, well, every case is different, every case is unique, so we're not
Yeah.
going to take that in consideration. But at the end of the day, if all that needs to happen from the plaintiff side is to file a lawsuit, move it into arbitration, and then get 3 times specials or more in an average arbitration award, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
why not?
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of attorneys are reluctant to
Yeah.
take that step of filing the lawsuit. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it is because that changes the demand on the case of
Yeah,
what there's a lot more to do, there's a
it's
lot
true.
more deadlines. Um, but your experience was that once that process occurred, they didn't lose value on those cases. They only saw increased offers.
There was a very rare, every once in a while, not opportunity, but scenario where we'd show up at an arbitration or a mediation and say, "Hey, gotcha. Here's this, Facebook post or whatever,"
Yeah,
like
yeah.
stuff like that. But
Gotcha.
outside of like just a routine, nothing like that
That's
kind
the
of
client
case.
screwing up their own
Right.
case, not the insurance
Yeah.
company just on their own
Right.
taking away an offer.
Yeah. That's not going to happen.
Great. Well, that's really good advice for anyone who's listening to this. Do you have anything else that kind of stands out to you about working with plaintiffs versus working with the insurance company?
I mean, honestly, I think I've been thinking about that a lot as I've made my way on this side, and uh, I see a lot of similarities. I see a lot of similarities in the conversations that we're having. You're talking about the case, you're talking about values, but I really do like the plaintiff side, the personal injury side a lot because it's being able to get to know the person, meet them, and have that real, tangible conversation with them that I don't think that you have on the other side because it's always adversarial, right? Whenever you are talking to a client or a third party claimant to resolve their claim, they're always defensive. When they're with us, they can open up a little bit and really be able to share what's really going on.
And how this injury has impacted their
Right.
life. And then our job is to translate what our client is saying to us
Yeah.
into something that's going to move the needle for the
Yeah.
adjuster.
Yep.
Um, is wage loss being ignored as common as it sounds like it is for other firms? Like, do people just not make wage loss claims?
I think it's hit or miss. I think that there's definitely some firms that would do it every time, and there'd be some firms that didn't. For me, when I was handling these cases, the standard to reasonably prove wage loss wasn't that high. It really wasn't. There would be a doctor's note, there would be, you know, some, pay stubs or PTO or
Something to
what is just
verify their
something.
hourly
Yeah, just
wage. Yeah.
something. And that was, one of those things, especially pre-lit, I was talking as a supervisor, talking to my adjusters about, it's like, it's pretty common for somebody to miss a couple of days after work.
Yeah.
Just give it to them. Like, why do you need, one of the things that sticks into my head when I was a PIP supervisor was my adjusters would very commonly ask the attorney or ask the client, the insured for one piece of item, one piece, pay stubs. Okay, we got them. Then we need the disability note. Okay, got it. Now we need this employer form or whatever. And it took so long to do that because we were piecemealing everything
Mm-hmm.
versus like, all right, here it is all in one go, done and done.
Yeah. I've been surprised, talking with other lawyers in this industry who are maybe, newer to
Yeah.
the world that I am, but they just, I guess, for whatever reason, don't ask their clients about wage loss and don't make that claim at all. And I just thought that was really weird. And it's good to know that you saw that as well. I agree. I don't think the standard is incredibly high, and obviously people shouldn't mislead anybody. But I think that it seems weird that attorneys aren't even asking that
Yeah.
question of their clients. Like, how many hours of work did you miss? Well, if you went to the chiropractor during your workday, then you missed work.
Right.
If you went to get massages during your workday, then you missed work.
Mhm.
And whether you used your sick pay or not doesn't matter.
Right.
And I find that kind of atrocious that other lawyers aren't even asking these questions. So it's good to know that it's not everyone not asking.
Yeah.
I'm not missing anything here. It's just some people don't ask. Not all lawyers are the same.
Yeah. And I mean, it's surprising to me that you say that too, because, that was one of the things that we trained. That was one of the things that we trained our adjusters to ask early on, because it was a very easy way to essentially, increase the value of their claim and ultimately offer them more money because we had more information, and that was really it. we were just again, it goes back to the common theme of asking the right questions and asking in depth what's going on and trying to figure things out. And wage loss is a big piece of it.
Can you share an example of a case, without sharing any names, but a case that you worked on that made you not want to work for the insurance companies anymore?
Yeah. One of the big things that frustrated me was how many people I had to talk to get authority and how many hoops I would have to jump through to get multiple people to understand what you or any other attorney was trying to tell us. I don't know what it was about it, but especially on those high dollar cases, high value cases where you just knew that this was a bad case, this was worth a lot of money, then still having to explain every single minute detail about every single thing versus, look, why are we fighting this?
Yeah.
Why are we putting up this shield? Why don't we just cut the check and resolve the claim?
Yeah.
And we're all done. We don't have to worry about it. And it's one less claim to worry about. And it's one more insured protected.
There was more than one person that you'd have to explain that stuff to?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The way our authority process worked is it was a hierarchy. Each person that you reported to and they reported to had a certain X number of dollars in authority. And
So it might have to go up multiple levels to get the level of authority that you need to resolve.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, of course, they wouldn't be familiar with the case. They haven't been adjusting it. So then you have to go and go and go.
Jake, what are 3 things someone should know if they don't have an attorney, if they do have an attorney, when they're dealing with an insurance adjuster?
I think one of the things that you really need to make sure that you have is responsiveness. I think that you need to be able to explain and talk about your injury with them. The thing about it is that it's always an adversarial relationship that you have with the insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be intimidating to call them and talk to them. And if you feel that you're not confident enough to do that, which I think 99% of the population is, if you don't have experience with that, I think it makes sense to at least consult with an attorney and kind of see what options that you might have. Also, making sure that you've written things down or documented what's happening. Our wage loss conversation from earlier, just making sure that you keep track of that and sending it in, because that makes it a lot easier for them to consider it. But yeah, we oftentimes would have people that just wouldn't call us, and we just close the case and we just wait, and maybe they'd file a claim, maybe they wouldn't. But yeah.
So the 3 main takeaways are: be responsive, talk to an attorney when you don't know what to say or what to do, and the third was
document
everything.
Yeah. And I know it's not the most fun or sexy thing to do for documentation, but it's really important, and it makes it so much easier to say, all right, as time goes on, as things go on, you've done this, you've missed this, you missed that. And it just makes completing your claim that much easier.
In your experience as an insurance adjuster, did you deal with a lot of claimants who didn't have an attorney?
Yeah, I would say the majority of claimants were unrepresented.
Did those people get the same sort of recovery as the people who were represented by an attorney?
Probably not.
No.
I don't think so. Because again, it goes back to being able to competently explain your case and the facts that were presented and the things that happened. And, if you're a layperson that doesn't have experience with the insurance world, you probably don't know what to say. You probably don't know how to accurately explain the severity of the things that you went through after an accident. So you just have to be careful.
Were you, as an adjuster, incentivized to resolve those claims for the minimum possible value that the claimant would accept?
The one thing that we always relied on as a standard was what was fair and reasonable, not a penny less, not a penny more. again, we would basically make offers on the first day after the accident. If we got in contact with them, we'd make an offer. And it was on them at that point in the heat of the moment, 24 hours, 12 hours later, calling from the scene of the accident for them to make that decision. The money would be there. We're working with whatever information they have, whatever knowledge or what they think about their injury
Mm.
right then and there. And that's very often when we're settling these cases, or we're settling these cases.
Yeah, not anymore,
Not
right? 'Cause
anymore.
you're working for the good guys. Can you give us an example of what your initial offers were that more often than not an attorney might say no to, but a person who's unrepresented might not know the value and just say yes because they don't know how to negotiate or they don't know the value of their injuries?
Yeah.
Can you give us an idea of what those numbers were?
Yeah, I would say honestly, early on within the first 72 hours, those offers were less than $5,000.
Mhm.
As we see, as the life of the claim goes on, the more expensive it becomes. So of course, the insurance company is incentivized to work to resolve those claims as early as possible. Oftentimes, that's what the person wants, or what they think they want. But at the end of the day, that's what we would do. We'd get money on the table, and if they wanted it, great. If not, we'd follow up with them in a month or whatever.
What's the lowest amount of money you ever saw a case resolved for?
$1, but that was a very specific circumstance. But I would say, in terms of like
$1.
the ones that were wanting to pursue a claim, and just cared about it, we had plenty of settlements that were $500, $250.
Wow.
Not 250,000, not 25,000, $250.
These cases that resolved for like 250, 500, $1, maybe not that one, but these cases that were resolving without an attorney for such low values, do you think that now in retrospect, working for the plaintiff's bar and your experience, I'm sorry, plaintiff's bar, but for a plaintiff's personal injury law firm, do you think that was true value of those cases, or do you think those cases were deflated because those people were not using an attorney?
I think that they just settled their claim too early. I think in that sense, yeah, it was deflated because, the second you walk into a primary care, it's going to be more than that.
Yeah.
And then that primary care is going to refer you to potentially an x-ray or chiropractic care or physical therapy or whatever. And as we see it, both as an adjuster and on the plaintiff side, that becomes very expensive really quick.
Yeah.
And what they're doing by settling so early is locking themselves out of getting the treatment that they need versus, well, I feel good now, so I'm going to settle the claim because I just don't want to deal with it.
Right. Can you give an example of a time, I'm sure you've dealt with it, that someone closed their claim, resolved it for $500, $800, whatever that minimum value was. Then a month later, they realize they're still in pain. They got medical treatment and they call you to try to reopen the claim.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes we'd be accommodating to it, but it really just depended on what they did. If they signed a release, hold harmless, all that sort of stuff, I mean, unless we were feeling really generous that day, there was no reason for us to recoup it or reopen it or renegotiate.
Yeah.
And that's the simple fact.
Yeah, it's a really sad truth that there's no such thing as buyer's remorse in
Right.
these cases, and it's really important at least to talk to an attorney before you sign that settlement, that release, that cash that check, because if you're more injured than you know, and you didn't get any medical treatment, it's not going to get better on its own, and you're not going to get paid for that medical care you need. Really sad that $500 was like a normal part of your day. I can't imagine resolving anybody's car accident case for $500. I just can't think of a situation where that's a fair settlement. So Jake, since you've been here and you've seen how we do things at Brumley Law Firm, can you explain maybe some differences between what and your job's not at risk here. You know, if we're one of the bad firms, yeah, I want you to say that. I want you to be honest. But
Yeah.
what's the difference between working against a good plaintiff's personal injury law firm and a bad one? What do you see as major differences between those two?
Yeah, there was always a stark difference between firms. You'd get to work with the same firms over and over. You'd have some firms, some attorneys that you just call them and they yell at you. Straight up just yells to where it's crackling on the phone
Wow.
for like 15, 30 minutes. And
Did
that was,
that help?
what do you think?
All right, all
Of
right.
course not. And
Okay.
it really just really strengthened the mindset that there's an adversarial relationship between the adjuster and the attorney that was never going to get better, that couldn't be worked through. What I like about working at Brumley is that we're able to kind of get past that adversarial relationship and just talk brass tacks. Like, talk, here's what's going on, what can you do for me? And actually thoughtfully negotiating versus yelling back and forth, or, you know, just not having a productive conversation, would go back in circles. Hey, give me your top offer. Well, I need more information, or I need to find out more about X, Y, or Z. Well, I don't have anything. You have everything. Okay, well, this is my offer. Okay, that's not going to work for the client. Okay, well, I'm going to hang up now. Okay,
Yeah.
well, like, that's, of course that's not going to be
Move the
productive. And then
needle.
you it's not going to move the needle. And then you have that same conversation every 2 weeks or however long you've
Yeah.
scheduled to work on it, and it goes until statute, and then they file a lawsuit, and then all of a sudden the case settles within 30 days.
Yeah.
So it's a cycle that you
D-
get into and you have to break it.
it's funny that you mentioned that we don't act that way. That's really important to me that that's apparent to you. The team that I've assembled here, being good at negotiations
Yeah.
without being assholes. Um, I did a lot of work as a public defender, and even though every day the prosecutor was someone who was at some points of the day trying to put my client in jail, and sometimes trying to, throw them back into prison, all sorts of crazy different situations. The facts were the facts, and we don't get to change the facts.
Right.
And my argument is for a judge to decide. And it does not matter what the prosecutor's point of view about my client was. It matters what I could persuade a jury
Yeah.
about. And if I came to this prosecutor and I said, listen, you don't know what you're talking about, and I came with that attitude, that's the attitude I would get back.
Right.
And I just think that negotiations are a lot more fruitful when someone comes to the table with a calm mind and says, here's what I think is wrong with your point of view, and elaborates and just says, it's okay if we don't agree.
Yeah.
If we don't agree, here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
The ball's in your court.
Yeah. And there were definitely firms that we negotiated with that their negotiation strategy wasn't to know the file. And that was another thing too. It's, as an adjuster, if you feel like they haven't looked at that file in 2 months, they just picked up the phone to talk numbers, and it's like, well, I need more than that. I need to actually have a fruitful conversation. That I think is a huge change and a huge swap when it comes to negotiations, making sure that you can effectively talk about the actual case at hand versus what could happen potentially in theory,
Right.
on average.
So the difference between a good firm and a bad firm was knowing the file in a way to have an articulate and calm conversation about what could happen with specific facts, to say, yeah, I know there was this previous accident, and yeah, she injured her knee, but that was her left knee. And in this case, she's complaining about an injury to her right knee, not just knee pain. So pointing that out to you might change your evaluation by saying, oh, her previous existing injury has nothing to do with this case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were times where I'd be thinking that I had the right understanding of the case, And then I'd be talking to an attorney that clearly, had the time and knew the file. And then like, oh, wait, did you say left? It was right. And you're like, oh, wait, hang on. They're right handed and they have a right shoulder issue or whatever. Then it completely, again, changes the value of the case. And it's like, oh, here, let me take another look at the file and give you a call back tomorrow. How's that sound?
Yeah.
And, stuff like that. It was always helpful. It's just never assuming, better than the other person.
So treating the person you're negotiating with as a human being, even though they're an adjuster for a multi-billion-dollar corporation.
Yeah, one of the things that I always thought was, could I go out to dinner with this person after the call? And oftentimes it would be no.
Really?
Just because it was so combative, so just I don't want to
adversarial.
Yeah, so adversarial for no reason. You have a job to do. I had a job to do. Let's just
do our jobs.
Do our jobs.
Yeah.
And do the things that we need to do to resolve the case one way or the other.
Yeah. And I think what some people who negotiate believe is that if I'm friendly to you, I'm going to be seen as less persuasive. And what my experience has been is I can say no to you in a friendly way and still be firm in my negotiations. If I say my terms are the policy limits and you say I can go to, 42,000 and my response is, I'm sorry, that's not going to do anything for me. I guess I got to file this lawsuit. I don't have to call you names.
Right, exactly.
It's just, you're going to say, well, if that's your position, I understand. And then maybe after we get off that phone call tomorrow, you do email me and you say, hey, I took another look at the file. Exactly. We can do 50.
Yeah. And that's the sort of thing too. If you're easy to work with, it's a lot more motivating for me to try to see what I missed.
Mm-hmm.
And, nobody's perfect. People forget things. People have the wrong case in mind or whatever.
And their own life that they're dealing with. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so just being present and friendly on the phone, even though it's a adversarial relationship, quote unquote, it's really important because 0 times that I got off the phone with somebody just yelling my ear off for 30 minutes did I find myself thinking, oh yeah, that was a really good argument. I liked that a lot. No, it was always the person that called me out on something that I missed, and I hung up the phone with my tail between my legs to my supervisor.
Yeah. So last question. I think a lot of people who are listening to this are going to be excited to just hear, what was the most that you ever paid to an attorney represented client and the most you ever paid to a non-represented client?
Well,
claimant.
The claim that I can think of attorney-wise was post-verdict. We got a verdict over our policy limits and paid it. That was somewhere north of $100,000. I don't remember the exact amount, but we had $100,000 policy. The most I ever sent to a claimant directly, I don't think I did anything over 25.
Wow.
That was a 25 policy limit.
Yeah. Wow. So 4 times the difference.
Yeah.
All right, Jake, thanks for joining us on the show today. I really appreciate you taking paid time away from the casework and coming down to the podcast studio, but you can head back, man, and get back to working hard for our clients.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.